Yo, what's up? Dr. Swole here, MD bodybuilder, back with another video. Today we're going to be talking about 10 things I wish I knew when I started lifting. In case you didn't know, this entire channel is based around providing useful information to one specific avatar viewer. And that avatar viewer is my younger self. Along my bodybuilding journey, I've made a lot of mistakes, and some of these have cost me time. In this video, I'm going to be going over 10 things I wish I knew in my first few years of training. These will cover a variety of domains, and will hopefully help you to avoid pitfalls and stalls in progress. If you've been getting value from my channel, make sure you smash that like button, hit subscribe, and let's get into it. The first point we're going to talk about here is not copying what other athletes or influencers do exactly. First of all, there is a huge amount of misinformation in bodybuilding. A lot of people follow practices that are not science-based and might just work for them because they have excellent genetics or are using performance-enhancing drugs. And even if what they're doing makes a lot of sense, there's a huge individual variation in terms of how you should be managing your diet and training programming. The other common thing I see that comes out of this is that people will take cookie-cutter programs and follow them exactly. This might work for a little bit, but it probably won't be optimal because you really need an individualized training program for optimal progress. I really want you to think of your body like a laboratory. Think about testing out different modifications to your training program as experiments and seeing how the results pan out after implementing those changes. The next point is that I wish I knew to optimize volume, rep ranges, and relative intensity. Volume can be looked at as sets times reps times weight lifted, or more generally just looking at the number of sets. And the thing about volume is as you increase it, your body has an inverted U-shaped response. So there's going to be an optimal amount of volume for each muscle group. The only way to find this out for each of your muscle groups is to experiment with different weekly volumes. The next thing I want to mention about volume is that your volume requirements will change across your training career. So the number of sets that got you gains as a beginner might not work as you become more advanced. So keep that in mind. Next, there's a broad range of rep ranges that work for bodybuilding. Anywhere from 1 to 40 reps can provide good hypertrophy, provided that you go near failure if you're going to the high rep ranges. The thing about rep ranges is that there's going to be an optimal rep range for different muscle groups and even for different exercises. And again, this is going to be something you'll have to try out for yourself. I give some general guidelines in the programs that I've explained on this channel, but in the end, those are just generalizations. Relative intensity is how close you go to failure. And initially when I started out, I thought that everything had to be taken to failure to get good hypertrophy. Now we know that as long as you're within about 0 to 4 reps in reserve, you can get good hypertrophy. If you're short on time or if you respond well to low volume training, then failure training might be a good idea. However, remember that relative intensity and volume are inversely related. If you train to failure all the time, this will limit the amount of productive volume that you're able to accomplish. So you should think about experimenting with a higher volume, lower relative intensity approach. I typically recommend staying about 1 to 2 reps shy of failure. The next thing I want to mention about volume is that your volume requirements will change across your training career. So the number of sets that got you gains as a beginner might not work as you become more advanced. So keep that in mind. Next up, when I started out, I wish I had known the importance of clean technique and full range of motion. Having good technique is key to making sure that you stimulate each muscle effectively. And you can waste a lot of time in the gym if you do a lot of cheating on exercises. Try filming yourself and really being objective about your technique. If you're using a lot of momentum on your lifts to get the weight up, you're probably missing out on gains. For myself, my back really lagged for a long time, largely in part because I wasn't executing my pulley movements effectively and would use a lot of body English on my heavy rows and lat pull downs. The other part of this is using a full range of motion. A full range of motion really makes sure that you get the most out of every rep. Sometimes I like to approximate training volume as total work, and your total work can be estimated by your sets times reps times weight lifted. But it also depends on your range of motion. If you're lifting with a fuller range of motion, you're going to be getting more productive volume out of every set. Now, I do think there are certain cases where it's not absolutely necessary to take your joint through 100% of the range of motion possible. However, these are the exceptions rather than the rule. So if you're cutting out part of the range of motion, you should really have a good reason for it. The next mistake I made as a beginner was that I was focusing a lot on isolation work, especially for your big muscle groups like your chest, back, quads, glutes and hamstrings, you really want to be focusing on compound movements. As a beginner, compound movements are just the best way to stimulate a large amount of muscle mass. The other big point is that a lot of beginners don't necessarily spend a lot of time in the gym, and I don't think there's a problem with that. I think most beginners will do well with 3 or 4 days of training. However, that being said, this is assuming that you're maximizing your productivity in the gym. If you're only in the gym 3 times a week and you're doing a lot of isolation work, you're probably missing out on some overall stimulus. A few examples of this would include flies for the chest, straight arm pull downs for the lats, leg extensions for the quads, and leg curls for the hamstrings. You'll see in my beginner training programs that I minimize the use of these types of exercises. Using isolation work is fine if you have a lot of time or as you get more advanced. However, for beginners, I think you're better off really focusing on your compound basic movements. Okay, the next thing I wish I knew about as a beginner was deloading and fatigue management. This doesn't apply to someone who's in their absolute novice phase in the first few months, but as you continue training, you will start to run into problems with fatigue management and chronic injuries, especially if you train hard. Note that this depends a lot on how rigorous your training program is, but you should think about hypertrophy as stimulating the muscle, which comes with damage, and then recovering and growing the muscle. And both parts of this equation are necessary for hypertrophy. If your training program isn't that rigorous, you may not need deloads. However, if you find yourself not recovering from session to session, having overlapping soreness, or having chronic aches and pains, it might be time for a deload. You can check out my video on deloads to know more about that. At the end of my first year of training, I was really getting serious, and I didn't take any time off and trained balls to the wall. What ended up happening is I got tendonitis in multiple muscles. I just kept training through it, and this really stalled out my progress and caused me problems later down the line. So as you become more serious, just keep deloading in mind and remember the importance of fatigue management. So just know that there is a limit to how much volume and high intensity training you can actually benefit from. Okay, the next point we're going to cover here is understanding calories and macros and flexible dieting. I think there's a lot to be gained for beginners by taking some time to track your macros and calories. This doesn't have to be all the time, and you don't have to do it forever. The key here is starting to understand how to eyeball macros. Ultimately, you want to be able to hit your calories and macros on the fly in a flexible way. I don't have a problem with following meal plans, but I think a flexible approach is where you want to be headed towards. Ultimately, this is just going to be the most sustainable way to keep up with bodybuilding. Now remember, fundamentally, the most important things you need to hit are calories and your protein. Once you hit those, the exact partitioning between carbs and fats doesn't matter as much. The next piece of advice I wish I'd taken was not bulking too fast. I remember going through a dreamer bulk at one point when I was gaining 1 or 2 pounds a week. And in retrospect, most of this was fat. There's a limit to the rate at which your body is able to build muscle. And if you gain weight at a faster rate, the rest is just going to be fat. You can check out my video on lean bulking for more, but my recommendations for beginners is that they aim to gain weight at a rate of about 1 to 1.5% of your body weight per month. The problem with bulking too hard is you end up putting a lot of unnecessary fat on, and you'll need to spend time dieting later to burn it off. Being in a calorie deficit is not ideal for muscle growth, so you really want to minimize the amount of time you spend in a deficit. The next thing I wish I had learned earlier was how to run a fat loss phase and mini cut properly. Depending on where you're starting off in terms of body fat, an absolute beginner doesn't necessarily need to cut. However, learning how to set up a fat loss phase properly will make it more efficient and also give you confidence so that you can actually bulk later on. A lot of people are afraid to ever put on fat during their bodybuilding career because they aren't confident in their ability to diet and burn off fat and maintain or continue to build muscle. Now, initially, beginners can build muscle and lose fat at the same time or achieve body recomposition. But as you become more advanced, this will get harder and harder, and eventually you won't get any progress using this method. But as you become more advanced, body recomposition will give you slower results, and eventually you'll stall. So learning how to run a fat loss phase effectively, and later on a shorter, more aggressive mini cut, you'll be able to lean bulk with confidence and not let your body fat get out of control. Now, the other point to know is that as you become more experienced, losing fat gets easier and easier. Part of this is because you know what to expect, and part of it is just because you get better at the process. So running small fat loss phases early on will really build your experience and knowledge about yourself. Next point here is that a lot more is possible naturally than you think. A lot of people think that to get a good physique, you need to be taking steroids, and this just isn't true. If you do things correctly, you can actually put on a lot of muscle naturally. Now, often when people run into stalls in their beginner or intermediate phases, they think to themselves that they've hit their genetic limit. Often the problem here is that they've just reached a plateau in knowledge. Looking back, every time I've run into stalls in the past, All that was needed was a few tweaks in my training and diet programming. So as you become more advanced, make sure that you continue to upgrade your knowledge so that you can keep improving your training and diet. I've been training for almost 9 years now, and I'm still making noticeable progress. So don't think that you're getting near your genetic limit after just a few years of training. In fact, I don't think you should make a comment at all about your genetics until you've been training for at least about 5 years seriously. There are a lot of gains that can be made as you continue to optimize your training and diet programming. The last piece of advice here I'd give to my younger self would be to find the right sources of information. There is a lot of science that goes into bodybuilding, and knowing what resources to use and what people to look to for information really helps. So the fact that you found this channel in the first place means that you have a big leg up already. But I don't know everything, and if anyone pretends like they do, that's definitely a red flag. If you want to know the people to look for better information, check out the guests that are on my podcast. If you haven't checked out my podcast, it's called Swole Radio, and I interview some of the smartest, brightest minds in bodybuilding. The other source I'd recommend is Mass, or Monthly Applications in Strength Sport. This is a monthly research review that summarizes all the best research in bodybuilding as it comes out. You can check out my affiliate link in the description below. That's all for now, guys. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, make sure you like the video and leave me a comment below. I'm really good about answering every single one of my comments, so you'll definitely hear back from me. In particular, what's one thing that you wish you knew when you started lifting? Let me know. If you're a beginner and you're looking for a program, check out this playlist, which has some bodybuilding programs that I've designed that are science-based and designed for people in their first couple years of training. If you've been getting value from my channel, make sure you subscribe and share the channel with your fitness friends so they can benefit from it too. See you next time.